Hi, hello. Quick disclaimer before we start. I'm not a lecturer, I'm not your lecturer. I'm just someone who recently graduated, as recently as earlier this week, in English Language and Literature from IIUM/UIA. So, what I'm about to say will be from that very specific perspective, based on what I studied, where I studied, and the lecturers I've learned from. But overall, these are the basics you might need to know if you're a literature major. Let's start with how to study and do revisions for an exam and or otherwise. General study tips: focus on one thing at a time and make sure you know your materials. Read the STEM novels. First things first, make sure you focus in class, specifically on the overall concept or approach that you're studying for that week or for that month. Look at your course outline. Say that week you're going to look into some post-colonial texts. So make sure you take note of the discussions on post-colonialism, the concepts, the themes, the terms that are used in class, things like alienation, mimicry, decolonization, us versus them, Orientalism, all that good stuff. And if you have a textbook, note down the definitions. And then after that, look back into your text and how these themes are presented in the characters or in certain events that happened. For example, if you have mimicry, if you learn about mimicry, write down the instances of where mimicry happened, by which character, during what event, and why it's significant. And choose your evidence here, choose your quotes, the quotes that pack a punch, quotes that carry meanings and reasons why you think it's important. Then see if you can find a comparison. For example, if you find an instance of mimicry where a character speaks English to imitate the colonizer, see if there's also an instance of a character who refuses to speak English, who is adamant about using their native language. See if you can find the reason behind that difference, a motivation behind the character, and so on. And then you repeat this process of 1. Understanding the term, 2. Finding an example of where this phenomenon or where this thing occur, and then 3. Compare and contrast, if there's any comparison with a character or with another event within that same text. And in this process, you might realize that a character or an event represent more than one thing. It could be things related to their race or their gender, class, age, and so on and so forth. For example, the sexualization of women is different from the sexualization of women of color. There are more nuances to it. There are differences in how these things are approached and the factors such as colonization and Orientalism. And that, my friend, is intersectionality. Intersectionality is where 2 or more factors are at play, so make sure you also note those examples down, and then the next thing you know, you've analyzed the whole text. And if you want to get an even better understanding of a text or the text that you've learned throughout your studies, try comparing one text to another, especially within a single subject. So look at those similarities, look at the differences, compare and contrast the characters, compare and contrast the events, see how they connect to a larger body of literature, and see how they connect to each other, because sometimes questions ask you to compare and contrast. So just have those ready, and then just repeat the whole thing until you're done. The major components in an essay is obviously the introduction, where you also have your thesis statement, and then your body paragraphs and your conclusion. We'll look into them one by one. Okay, let's start with introduction. Normally, there are 2 things that you introduce here, which are the text itself and your essay. When introducing the text, you can just say the title, when it was published, who is the author, and you can also talk about a synopsis. And usually that synopsis already contains the major thing that you want to talk about in your essay. And then you get into the introduction to your essay, which is the thesis statement. A thesis statement is an argument that you want to make about the text. You want to argue something, you want to convey a certain point. And to do this, it's usually just the answer to the question that you're being asked in an exam, or the question you're being asked for an assignment, for example. In the question, then normally would already be the key concepts, the terms that you have to tackle. So anchor on that, focus on that, and see how you can come up with 3 things that you want to talk about. It's usually 3 things, as in like for 3 body paragraphs. Depends on how long the essay is going to be, the paper is going to be. When you want to create a thesis statement, it has to go hand in hand with what you want to write in your body paragraphs. 3 things, the X, Y, Z of the thesis statement could be factors, solutions, effects. But the most important thing is you have to connect the 3 things, and you have to connect them to the key concepts or the terms or the phenomenon or whatever it is that is mentioned in your question. The whole thing, the gist of it, is to connect them. Make sure that you can explain your thesis statement in a sentence that makes sense. Okay, to be fair, it could be 2 sentences. I'm going to be honest, 4 years of degree plus 1 year foundation. Thesis statement is one of the most difficult thing to think about, but the bulk of it, or like the main thing about your thesis statement is that it has to be connected without being just a list of things. Another way of making sure that your thesis statement is connected is explaining how, because usually questions ask about how or why. And these questions want you to talk about the process. And when it comes to process, you can talk about the factor, that could be your X. You can talk about an example of how this manifests, that could be your Y. And maybe another example, that could be your Z. Or you can talk about how you think this thing can be avoided. Or this is not the same across every character. There is a character that is an anomaly. That could also be your Z. Paling penting, connect. Now that you have your thesis statement, you have your XYZs, you know what you want to talk about, then you can move into your body paragraph. So the basic thing about body paragraph, you have to have the topic sentence, the explanation, the evidence, explanation to the evidence, and then you conclude the whole paragraph. Topic sentence, you just mention once again, it's whether it's the X, the Y, or the Z that you're going to talk about in this paragraph, why you think it's relevant according to the key concept, the evidence that portray this phenomenon that you're talking about, why you think that evidence is important, and then you conclude the whole thing, like wrap it up again. Usually when it comes to like repeating, like concluding a paragraph, you just sort of paraphrase the topic sentence while also including some details from your evidence. Like you can say, the portrayal of alienation through the use of language is evident as portrayed by lmao. Not that short lah, but you get the gist of it. Last thing is the conclusion. So for conclusion, you basically, what I do personally, I don't know if this is like the best thing, it's probably not. I would paraphrase my thesis statement, but also include some details that I've talked about in the body paragraphs. Basically recalling to the audience what the whole essay is all about and how I've managed to prove my point throughout the whole thing. And maybe I would include like a pattern or something that I want to highlight that I've already talked about in the essay itself. I just didn't put it succinctly because you don't want to bring up a new point in your conclusion. It's a conclusion for a reason, but you might want to say something that you quote unquote didn't finish saying in your essay. Let's kind of talk about how you can arrange your points. First of all, don't try to talk about everything. Make sure you have your arguments ready, make sure you have your evidences ready, and make sure you know how to connect them. Figure out your thesis statement. If it's going to be cause and effect, if it's going to be effects and solution, cause, effect, solution, whatever, these are just examples. And figure out maximum 2 evidence that can go under each one, under each point, and see if you can actually connect those 2 evidences. Especially if it's something that you compare and contra, that is easier for you to like fit 2 things into one paragraph. But if they don't go together, don't do it. It's not about having the most evidence, kota paling ingat text tu. It's about how you can argue why this evidence is important, why this evidence sends the message that you believe it sends, and how the message is sent, aka your thesis statement. Make sure you at least have an idea of how your thesis statement is going to look like. Even though I suck at thesis statement, it's very important because this is what your whole essay anchors on. And if you at least have an idea of how your thesis statement is going to look like, you can go back to that. If you feel yourself like writing too much about something that might not be important or relevant, you might be explaining events or things that does not go back to what you said in your thesis statement. Someone make a count of how many times I said thesis statement. But yeah, that's about it, I think. Once again, I'm not a lecturer. I'm not your lecturer. I just graduated 2 days ago. But this is what I did in my 4 years of degree and 1 year foundation to survive taking English literature. Bye.